My boss humiliated me in front of our biggest clients, thinking I was just another disposable employee. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. What happened next changed everything, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why respect isn't just earned, it's demanded. I never thought I'd be the person to bring down a corporate bully, but sometimes life has other plans. My name is Jake, and I've been working in tech consulting for about 8 years. Not glamorous, not exciting, but it pays the bills and I'm genuinely good at what I do. The company I worked for, TechFlow Solutions, specialized in helping mid-sized businesses optimize their digital infrastructure. Sounds boring, right? Well, it was, until it wasn't. My boss, Richard Steinberg, was what you'd call a classic corporate predator. Tall, expensive suits, perfect teeth, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He'd been with the company for 15 years, climbing the ladder by taking credit for other people's work and throwing his team under the bus whenever things went south. I'd watched him operate for 3 years, always thinking someone would eventually see through his act. I was wrong. The thing about Richard was that he had this talent for making you feel small. Not through screaming or obvious aggression, but through subtle cuts, public embarrassments, and this way of looking at you like you were barely worth his time. He'd interrupt you in meetings, dismiss your ideas without consideration, and somehow make you feel grateful when he finally acknowledged your existence. It's psychological manipulation at its finest, and I fell for it completely. Our team was small but efficient. Besides me, there was Sarah, a brilliant data analyst who'd been there for 2 years, and Marcus, a newer hire who handled client relations. We worked well together, covering each other's weaknesses and celebrating each other's wins. But Richard had a way of isolating us, making each of us feel like we were competing for his approval rather than working as a team. The project that changed everything started in early March. Meridian Industries, a manufacturing company with about 2,000 employees, was looking to overhaul their entire IT infrastructure. We're talking about a $2 million contract, the kind that could make or break a quarter for a company our size. Richard was salivating from the moment the RFP hit his desk. I'd been developing a comprehensive proposal for weeks. Late nights, weekend work, diving deep into their current systems and identifying not just problems, but opportunities for growth. I created detailed implementation timelines, cost projections, and even identified potential risks they hadn't considered. It was some of the best work I'd ever done, and I knew it. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Their entire executive team would be there, including the CEO, Janet Morrison, who had a reputation for being sharp, demanding, and absolutely ruthless when it came to vendors who wasted her time. This was make or break territory. Tuesday afternoon, Richard called me into his office. He was sitting behind his mahogany desk, looking through the proposal materials I'd submitted. He didn't look up when I entered. "Jake, we need to talk about Thursday's presentation." His voice was casual, almost bored. "I've been reviewing your work, and I'm concerned about the technical depth. These are sophisticated people, and I'm not sure you have the experience to handle their questions." I felt my stomach drop. "Richard, I've been working on this for weeks. I know their systems inside and out. I've run through every possible scenario." He finally looked up, that condescending smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm sure you have. But this is a $2 million deal, Jake. I can't afford to have someone stumble through technical questions they can't answer. I'm going to handle the presentation myself. But this is my project. I developed the entire proposal. And I appreciate that. Really, I do. But I'm the senior partner here, and ultimately, I'm responsible for the success of this deal. You'll be there, of course, to provide support if needed." Support. Like I was some junior associate instead of the person who'd spent 3 weeks crafting every detail of this proposal. But I nodded, because that's what you do when you're trapped in a system that doesn't value your contributions. Wednesday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the work I'd put in, all the insights I'd developed, all the solutions I'd crafted. Richard would be presenting my ideas as his own, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Thursday morning arrived with that crisp autumn air that usually makes me feel optimistic. Not today. I dressed carefully, knowing I'd be sitting in the background while Richard took credit for months of my work. Sarah and Marcus were already at the office when I arrived, both looking nervous about the big presentation. "You ready for this?" Sarah asked, but something in her tone suggested she knew exactly what was happening. "As ready as I can be," I replied, which was true in ways she couldn't imagine. The Meridian team arrived at 10:30. Janet Morrison was exactly what I'd expected: sharp gray suit, steel gray hair, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of our conference room. She was accompanied by their CTO, David Chen, their CFO, Patricia Wells, and their head of operations, Michael Rodriguez. These were serious people with serious money, and they didn't have time for amateur hour. Richard was in his element, playing the role of the seasoned executive. He'd clearly studied my proposal, but as he began presenting, I noticed he was sticking to surface-level talking points, avoiding the technical details that would actually matter to their team. At TechFlow Solutions, Richard was saying, "We pride ourselves on comprehensive analysis and innovative solutions. Our approach to your infrastructure challenges is both practical and forward-thinking." He was using all the right buzzwords, but I could see David Chen's expression growing more skeptical by the minute. These people dealt with tech vendors every day, and they could smell BS from a mile away. 20 minutes into the presentation, Janet Morrison interrupted. "Mr. Steinberg, this all sounds very impressive, but I'm not hearing specifics. How exactly do you plan to handle the integration challenges between our legacy manufacturing systems and the new cloud infrastructure?" Richard's pause was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. "That's an excellent question, Janet. The integration process is complex, but our team has extensive experience with these types of challenges. Could you be more specific? What's your timeline for the legacy system migration, and how do you plan to minimize downtime during the transition?" Another pause. "Well, obviously, minimizing downtime is crucial. We'd implement a phased approach that ensures business continuity throughout the process." David Chen leaned forward. "What kind of phased approach? Are you talking about parallel systems, gradual cutover, or something else entirely?" I watched Richard's face, and I could see the panic starting to set in. He was drowning, and he knew it. These weren't softball questions from impressed clients. These were technical professionals who wanted real answers. "Jake," Richard said suddenly, turning to me with that same condescending smile, "why don't you explain the technical details to our friends here? I know you've been working on some of the more basic implementation concepts." Basic implementation concepts. He might as well have introduced me as the coffee boy. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from pure rage. He was about to throw me under the bus in front of the biggest clients we'd ever pitched, making it look like I was the junior associate who handled the grunt work while he developed the strategic vision. But here's the thing about being underestimated. People don't see you coming. I stood up slowly, straightening my tie. "Of course, Richard. I'd be happy to walk through the technical architecture." I moved to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. "Ms. Morrison, Mr. Chen, you're absolutely right to focus on the integration challenges. They're the make or break element of this entire project." I began drawing a diagram, but not the simple flowchart that Richard would have attempted. I sketched out their entire current architecture, including details about their manufacturing execution systems, their inventory management databases, and the custom applications they'd built over the past decade. "Your biggest challenge isn't the cloud migration itself," I continued, "it's maintaining real-time data synchronization between your production floor and your business intelligence systems during the transition. You can't afford even 30 minutes of downtime during peak production hours." David Chen sat up straighter. "Exactly. How do you propose we handle that? Dual-write architecture with eventual consistency guarantees. We implement a message queue system that captures all data changes in real time, then use that queue to maintain synchronization between your legacy systems and the new cloud infrastructure. During the transition period, both systems run in parallel, with the queue ensuring that no data is lost and no transactions are missed." I was hitting my stride now, and I could see the change in the room. These weren't just impressive-sounding technical terms. I was describing a real solution to their real problems, with specific implementation details that showed I understood their business. The migration happens in phases, I continued, now drawing timeline charts on the whiteboard. Phase 1, we established the dual write system for non-critical data. Phase 2, we migrate your historical data during off-peak hours. Phase 3, we begin routing new transactions through the cloud system while maintaining the legacy system as a fallback. Phase 4, we gradually shift critical operations to the cloud infrastructure. The entire process takes about 6 months, with planned downtime limited to 4-hour windows during scheduled maintenance periods. Patricia Wells, the CFO, leaned forward. What about cost overruns? Every tech project we've ever done has exceeded budget by at least 30%. That's because most vendors underestimate the complexity of legacy system integration, I replied. Our proposal includes a 20% contingency buffer specifically for unexpected integration challenges. But more importantly, we've built in checkpoints at each phase where we can reassess and adjust the approach if needed. You'll never be surprised by costs because we'll be evaluating and communicating potential changes every step of the way. Michael Rodriguez, the operations head, had been taking notes throughout my explanation. This is impressive, but how do we know your team can actually execute this? This level of technical complexity requires serious expertise. This was my moment. I could feel Richard's eyes on me, probably expecting me to defer to him as the senior partner. Instead, I smiled. Great question, Michael. Let me walk you through our team's relevant experience. I began listing specific projects, naming clients, describing challenges we'd overcome. But I wasn't just talking about our team's experience. I was talking about my experience, my solutions, my innovations. 2 years ago, I led the infrastructure overhaul for Blackstone Manufacturing, a company very similar to yours. They had the same legacy system challenges, the same uptime requirements, the same budget constraints. We delivered the project 3 weeks ahead of schedule and 12% under budget. I could see Richard's face out of the corner of my eye. He was realizing that I wasn't just answering questions. I was demonstrating that I was the technical expert on this project, and that everything in our proposal had come from my analysis and my solutions. Last year, I designed the integration architecture for Pinnacle Industries' cloud migration. They were processing about 50,000 transactions per day through legacy systems that were literally running on hardware from 2003. We built a custom integration layer that allowed them to modernize their entire operation without losing a single day of production. Janet Morrison was nodding, making notes. Mr. Jake Morrison. No relation, I said with a smile that got a small laugh from the room. Jake, this is exactly the kind of technical depth we were looking for. How involved would you be in the actual implementation? Before I could answer, Richard jumped in. Jake is obviously a valued member of our team, but as the senior partner, I'd be overseeing the project personally to ensure everything meets our quality standards. The room went quiet. I could feel the shift in energy, and I knew this was the moment that would define everything that happened next. Actually, I said, keeping my voice calm and professional, I should clarify something. I developed this entire proposal. The technical architecture, the implementation timeline, the cost projections, the risk assessments. Everything you've seen today came from my analysis of your systems and my understanding of your business needs. Richard's face went red. Jake, I think you're overstating your... I'm not overstating anything, I interrupted, still calm but with steel in my voice. I've spent 3 weeks studying Meridian's infrastructure, identifying pain points, and developing solutions. Every recommendation in our proposal is based on my technical analysis and my experience with similar projects. I turned back to the Meridian team. I want to be completely transparent with you. Mr. Steinberg is the senior partner at TechFlow Solutions, and he's been with the company much longer than I have. But this project, this proposal, this solution, it's my work. And if you choose to work with us, I'll be the one responsible for making sure it succeeds. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear Richard's breathing, quick and shallow. Sarah and Marcus were staring at me like I just announced I was running for president. Janet Morrison looked between Richard and me, then back at the whiteboard where I'd drawn out their entire technical architecture. Jake, can you walk us through the risk mitigation strategies? Specifically, what happens if the dual write system fails during the transition period? For the next hour, I answered every question they threw at me. Technical questions, business questions, timeline questions, cost questions. I had answers for everything because I'd spent weeks preparing for exactly these conversations. Richard sat in his chair, occasionally trying to interject with some generic comment, but it was clear to everyone in the room who was driving this presentation. By the time the Meridian team left, I knew we'd won the contract. Not because they were impressed with our company, but because they were impressed with me. Janet Morrison shook my hand at the door and said, "Jake, I'm looking forward to working with you on this project." After they left, Richard asked me to stay behind. Sarah and Marcus quickly made themselves scarce, probably sensing the storm that was coming. What the hell was that? Richard's voice was quiet, controlled, but I could see the rage in his eyes. That was me doing my job. Your job is to support the senior partners, not to grandstand in front of clients. My job is to deliver results for our clients. Which is exactly what I did. You embarrassed me in front of our biggest potential client. You made me look incompetent. I didn't make you look incompetent, Richard. You made yourself look incompetent when you tried to present technical solutions you didn't understand. He stood up, and for a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me. Instead, he pointed at the door. Get out. We'll discuss this later. I left his office knowing that my time at TechFlow Solutions was probably over. But I also knew that I just had the most professionally satisfying hour of my career. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find an email from Janet Morrison waiting in my inbox. The subject line read, Meridian Industries Contract Award. They'd chosen us for the project. More specifically, they'd chosen me for the project. The contract included a clause stipulating that I would be the primary technical lead, and that any changes to the project team would require their approval. I printed out the email and walked to Richard's office. He was already there, looking like he hadn't slept much. We got the contract, I said, placing the printout on his desk. He read it, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, relief, and then anger as he reached the clause about my role. They want you as the technical lead. They want the person who understands their systems and can deliver the results they need. This is still my project, Jake. Don't forget that. Actually, Richard, I think you need to read the contract more carefully. He looked down at the document again, and I could see the moment he understood. The contract wasn't just with TechFlow Solutions. It was specifically with TechFlow Solutions and Jake Morrison as technical lead. They'd structured the deal so that I was essentially irreplaceable. You planned this, he said. I planned to do good work and deliver results for our client. Everything else was just consequences. Over the next 6 months, I led the Meridian project exactly as I'd promised. We delivered on time, under budget, and exceeded every performance metric they'd set for us. Janet Morrison was so impressed that she recommended us to 3 other companies, specifically requesting that I lead their projects as well. Richard tried to maintain his authority, but it was a losing battle. Word got around the industry about the TechFlow Solutions technical lead who could actually deliver on his promises. My phone started ringing with job offers, consulting opportunities, and partnership proposals. The final nail in Richard's coffin came during our year-end review. The company's revenue had increased by 40%, driven almost entirely by the success of the Meridian project and the follow-up contracts it had generated. When the senior partners met to discuss promotions and compensation adjustments, they had to acknowledge that I'd become the company's most valuable technical resource. Richard was reassigned to business development, essentially a lateral move that took him away from project management. I was promoted to Senior Technical Director, with a salary increase that nearly doubled my income and equity options that made me a partial owner of the company. The day after the promotions were announced, Richard cleaned out his desk and left. I heard through the grapevine that he joined a competing firm, but without the track record of successful projects and client relationships, he was starting over at a much lower level. I ran into him about a year later at an industry conference. He was working for a small consultancy, doing the kind of basic IT support work that I'd been doing when I first started at TechFlow Solutions. He saw me across the room and actually tried to avoid me, but I made a point of walking over to say hello. "Richard, good to see you. How's the new position?" He looked older, tired, and for the first time since I'd known him, uncertain. "It's fine. Building something new, you know." "That's great. I always thought you had entrepreneurial instincts." We made small talk for a few minutes, but the dynamic was completely different. I wasn't the subordinate trying to earn his approval. I was the successful executive making polite conversation with someone who tried to hold me back. As I walked away, I realized that I didn't feel any satisfaction from his downfall. I didn't feel vindicated or victorious. I just felt free. Free from the need to prove myself to people who couldn't see my value. Free from the fear of being underestimated or dismissed. Free to do the work I loved without worrying about who would take credit for it. The truth is, Richard did me a favor that day in the conference room. By trying to humiliate me in front of those clients, he forced me to stand up for myself in a way I'd never done before. He pushed me to claim credit for my work, to demonstrate my expertise, and to show everyone in that room who was really driving our success. If he'd just let me present the project as planned, I probably would have continued being the invisible technical expert, doing great work while someone else got the recognition. Instead, his petty power play backfired so spectacularly that it changed the entire trajectory of my career. These days, I run my own consultancy. We're small but growing, and we focus on exactly the kind of complex technical challenges that I love solving. I've got a team of brilliant people who share my commitment to actually delivering results rather than just talking about them. Sometimes former colleagues ask me for advice about dealing with difficult bosses or toxic work environments. I always tell them the same thing: do excellent work, know your worth, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself when it matters. The people who try to diminish you are usually the ones who are most threatened by your success. The corporate world is full of Richard Steinbergs, people who've learned to navigate systems and climb ladders without actually developing the skills to do the work. They survive by taking credit for other people's contributions and by making sure that the people who actually create value never get too much recognition. But here's what I learned from that experience: competence is ultimately more powerful than politics. You can play games and manipulate people for a while, but eventually, results matter. Eventually, clients want to work with people who can actually solve their problems, not just people who can talk about solving their problems. The other thing I learned is that respect isn't something you can demand or expect. It's something you earn by consistently delivering value and by having the courage to stand up for yourself when necessary. I spent years trying to earn Richard's respect by being the perfect subordinate, but I never got it until I stopped caring about his approval and started focusing on doing work that mattered. The Meridian project was successful not because I embarrassed my boss in front of clients, but because I'd done the work to understand their problems and develop real solutions. The presentation was just the moment when I finally had the courage to claim credit for what I'd accomplished. If you're dealing with a boss who doesn't value your contributions, who takes credit for your work, or who tries to keep you in a box that's smaller than your capabilities, remember this: your work speaks for itself, but sometimes you have to be the one to amplify your voice. Don't wait for someone else to recognize your value. Know your worth, document your contributions, and don't be afraid to advocate for yourself when the moment comes. The corporate world can be brutal, but it's also full of opportunities for people who are willing to do excellent work and stand behind it. The Richard Steinbergs of the world seem powerful, but they're actually quite fragile. Their power depends on other people's willingness to accept their authority without question. The moment you start questioning, the moment you start demonstrating your own competence, the moment you start claiming credit for your contributions, that's when the whole house of cards starts to fall down. I'm not saying you should go into every meeting looking for a fight. I'm saying you should go into every meeting prepared to demonstrate your value and defend your contributions if necessary. Know your work, know your worth, and don't let anyone make you feel small for doing excellent work. The best revenge against someone who tries to diminish you isn't sabotage or retaliation. It's success. It's proving, through your work and your results, that they were wrong about you. It's building a career that doesn't depend on their approval or their recognition. Richard Steinberg thought he could humiliate me in front of our biggest clients, and in a way, he did. But he also gave me the opportunity to show everyone in that room who I really was and what I was capable of. His attempt to keep me in my place became the catalyst for me to create my own place. That's the thing about bullies in the corporate world. They're usually bullies because they're insecure about their own competence. They attack other people's confidence because they're afraid of being exposed as frauds. But competence is hard to fake, and eventually, the truth comes out. If you're watching this video because you're dealing with a boss who doesn't respect you, who takes credit for your work, or who tries to keep you from reaching your potential, I want you to know that you have more power than you think. You have the power to do excellent work, to document your contributions, and to stand up for yourself when it matters. You also have the power to leave. Sometimes the best way to deal with a toxic boss is to find a better opportunity somewhere else. Don't stay in a situation that's holding you back just because you're afraid of change or because you think you owe someone your loyalty. The corporate world is full of opportunities for people who are willing to do the work and stand behind their contributions. Don't let someone else's insecurity or ego keep you from reaching your potential. Do the work, know your worth, and don't be afraid to claim credit for your contributions. The Richard Steinbergs of the world seem powerful, but they're actually quite vulnerable. Their power depends on other people's willingness to accept their authority without question. The moment you start questioning, the moment you start demonstrating your own competence, that's when everything changes. That's when you realize that you don't need their approval to be successful. That's when you start building a career that's based on your own merit rather than someone else's recognition. It's been 5 years since that presentation, and I still think about it sometimes. Not because I'm proud of embarrassing my boss, but because it was the moment I finally understood my own value. It was the moment I stopped waiting for someone else to recognize my contributions and started claiming credit for my own work. The corporate world can be brutal, but it's also full of opportunities for people who are willing to do excellent work and stand behind it. Don't let someone else's insecurity or ego keep you from reaching your potential. Do the work, know your worth, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself when it matters. Sometimes the people who try to hold you back end up being the ones who push you forward. Richard Steinberg thought he was putting me in my place, but he actually helped me find my place. His attempt to diminish me became the catalyst for me to create something better. That's the real lesson here. The people who try to keep you small are usually the ones who are most threatened by your potential. Don't let their fear become your limitation. Do the work, know your worth, and don't be afraid to claim credit for your contributions. The corporate world is full of opportunities for people who are willing to do excellent work and stand behind it. Don't let someone else's insecurity or ego keep you from reaching your potential. What's your experience with difficult bosses or toxic work environments? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a professional setting? Share your story in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, make sure to subscribe for more real stories about navigating the corporate world.